So Peter Fishburn passed away a few months ago, and his name brings many good dear memories to me. I worked much when he was active still, and I collaborated with him on a paper, knew him well, and I will tell many first-hand memories illustrating the many valuable qualities that he had. One of my first research topics was to do a preference axiomatization for unbounded probability distributions, but my theorems were not really working very well. I didn't get the generality I hoped for. And then I did what I should have done before. I read a paper by Peter Fishburn, his work. Then I discovered, he had a very clever definition, much more clever than I did. Preference intervals, I would define them by specifying the bounds, but Peter would define them by specifying intermediate value property. That was a bit more general. Then I happily started using his definition, his better idea. Then my theorem started working smoothly, and that was just the way to go. So very early on, I had to admit that this guy is a good mathematician, very good mathematician. Also, in my early years, I was lucky to have the book Utility Theory for Decision Making by Peter of 1970. It's a marvelous book. It's still among the 5 my favorite books that I know. It was presenting all classical theories, still written by a young Peter Fishburn. It was all to the point, all the important facts were there, efficiently presented, impeccably, of course. And also today, when nowadays we study many different models in decision theory, but usually I recommend my people and I tell my students first read Fishburn 1970 to first understand the classical model as well. Then you also understand better how the new theories are deviating from it. The book was impeccable, and maybe this brings me to the one big problem that Fishburn had, and that was he was too good. He was too perfect. Whenever he wrote something, he immediately wrote a perfect paper. You can't do nothing to improve. He was too good for the people around him. It can be quite annoying, because if Peter starts working on a topic, then everybody else leaves that field because nothing more to do for the others. Again, I have a first-hand experience. Fishburn was a master in using what is called nowadays Anscombe-Almond model, which in fact he defined in the best way. And already at young age, I decided, let me not work on that model because there's Fishburn, let me then try to do alternative routes. So, and maybe it sounds a bit like a joke, too good to be true, but in a way, he was too high above people, so people did not understand him very well. That may have reduced his impact a bit. But we should not, people were intimidated, we should not do it. I think if you keep on reading his papers, keep studying, it's so good, you learn from it, you benefit from it. Peter, in the first place, he was interested in the mathematics. That's completely formal to the point that he wanted. That was his big passion. There were, of course, he did write about interpretations of models, empirical meaning, and things like that. But if he would write on such topics, he would keep it very brief, completely to the point. Again, completely perfect. He perfectly well understood all these things. But in a way, they were too simple for him. He did not write such things with enthusiasm. He was too much above it in a way. So, but then if you still read his text, just read every word. It's very compact always, but it's completely perfect to the point. It's rewarding, especially his 1970 book. I keep on recommending everybody to study it. I first met Fishburn in person around 88 or so in a conference. Before that time, I saw how he was working so much. He was dominant in many fields. I thought, this man must be working day and night. He must be very efficient in using computers, copying text from papers to other papers. How else can he write so many papers? And it must be a dominant person because he knows everything better than everybody else. The personal meeting with him was the complete opposite. He was a somewhat thin, not very tall person. He was shy. He liked little jokes with his typical laugh. So he worked every day from 9 to 5, and that's it, 5 days per week. He came to the office, he wrote everything by hand, never computer. So and everything was, but I think he did all the word processing immediately in his mind. I always have to rewrite papers 10 times before it looks like anything. He immediately, from zero, wrote everything perfectly well. Very efficient, completely clear brains. Also, many other things in life. Christianity was central in his life. He did many things besides his research work. I did have the pleasure of having one paper that he and I wrote together. We were both primarily mathematicians. And in a way, I liked that the paper was not at all about mathematics. It was about the invention of the phenomenological independence utility theory, the preference condition for expected utility, how that was invented, the history of it. And in that work with Peter, I could also experience how much everybody respects, appreciates him, and is willing to help. When we wrote some letters to some people, quickly Milton Friedman sent us a big envelope with all the paper copies in those days, and envelopes as it went in those days, with all the letter correspondence between Samuelson and Savage. That was magic, because two of the greatest minds of our time, and in that correspondence, mostly the idea of Savage sure think principle, I think, is the most central idea in our field. The dividing line between Bayesianism and not, between rationality or not, I would say. It came about in that correspondence primarily. Then having that in your hand, these great spirits, how they communicate with each other, it was fantastic. And I could benefit from that because I could collaborate with Fishburn. He was so much respected, had so many good connections. Everybody liked him. I can also testify to the integrity of Peter. He would always much credit priority of other people and every idea that everybody else had done. When I just started my research around 1979, and I saw a funny example of the Savage 54 model, expected utility. And it was a funny example, countable state space. So I sent a letter to Peter Fishburn with it. And it was those days. Letter means handwritten, put in an envelope on a ship for 4 weeks, and then the other side receives it. I had no publication. I was just a student who did it. And I was admiring that researcher so much. I thought, let me write to that hero. So I never heard of it again until in 1990, so 10 years later. Then I had some publications, and it was a conference in Irvine. There were 10 Russian researchers, 10 American researchers, and one in between from Europe. That was me in a small workshop. Peter Fishburn was also there. And then he put up the example that I had sent him, and he cited me for it. You can imagine it's still among my most favorite memories for all the rest of my life. I was so happy, but also that he remembers it and really credits a completely unknown person. That also happened when in the late 1980s, it became popular to work with models deviating from expected utility. Fishburn also did something in that direction. His skew symmetric bilinear models. These models gave up the transitivity condition of classical models. So Fishburn was working on it, he initiated much in it. At some stage, he discovered that there was a 1961 paper in French by a French author, and Crevera, I don't know exactly how to pronounce, who had already written this idea, not much more, but the idea had already written in French. So Fishburn immediately started crediting that guy for having been the first to write that model. That nobody would have known if he hadn't done it, but that was Fishburn. His integrity was beyond any doubt. So he was a great intellect in mathematics. Everybody liked him. He was perfectly integrity was perfect. Still, we have many things influenced of Fishburn that are going on today. Although maybe he doesn't deserve the credit that he doesn't get the credit that he deserves. So that's how I should put it. For instance, there is now in uncertainty, ambiguity, a really popular model. The Anscombe-Aumann framework, as people call it, is the most popular. Well, that's not really. It was Fishburne. Ansgar Alma had a more general framework, but Fishburne, as always, saw the most efficient, perfect version of it, and he put that forward. What everybody nowadays calls the Ansgar Alma model is what Fishburne made of it. Maybe we should call it Fishburne model. And everybody is using that today, thanks to Fishburne. But he's not credited so much. He was a bit. People were a bit scared of him. He was too perfect, so people don't realize that's one of the influences. Still, Peter Fishburn were using it every day. Another influence still today is something called salience theory. It was Schleifer, the famous finance researcher, most cited economist, and his team put it forward and worked on it. But the formula they proposed were actually not so very good. And in fact, the formulas that Fishburne used work better. Nowadays, mostly if people work in salience theory, as they call it, they use the Fishburne formulas, but they say, well, this is a variation of salience theory. We're using salience theory. But there's another stream of work where it is, in fact, Fishburne's idea that is going on. So also today, we can enjoy the many great contributions of this great person and great researcher. And I'm always happy about all the things he did that I can remember. So let us continue. Let us keep on appreciating his good influences and keep on reading. Like his 1970 book, even now, it's for every student in decision theory. I think you should read that book. So with that, I conclude my words on Peter Fishburn. Thank you.